So the question is, can you use a DI box instead of an interface when recording your music? And also, how can you prevent your mixes from sounding overly scooped in the mid-range? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode 32. So before we jump into this excellent group of questions submitted by my loyal subscribers, I just want to let you know that if you're looking to improve the sound of your mixes and your productions, you have to understand that so much of your results comes down to how well you understand basic EQ and compression. Regardless of the tools you're using, whether you're using stock plugins, paid for plugins, analog hardware, or your DAW, it doesn't matter. And this is why I'm offering you direct access for absolutely free to my crisp and clear heavy mix formula. The heavy mix formula is comprised of three main components: an EQ compression cheat sheet that contains all of my starting points whenever I start a heavy mix. Within the PDF guide, there are clickable links to private mixing tutorials for each of the main instruments that exist within most heavy productions. And along with each tutorial, you get a multi-track download so you can mix the exact same tracks that I'm mixing in the lessons. Again, you can have direct access right now to the heavy mix formula for absolutely free. There's a link below in this video's description. Click it and you'll have instant access. So without any further ado, let's jump into this excellent group of questions. Question number one comes from Mr. Jesse. I know you are very busy, but I have one simple question. How to avoid scooped sounding mixes? I remove no low mids or mid-range, so that's not the issue. The problem is when I boost upper mids for tone and cut and low end for girth and body, the middle gets left behind, resulting in a scooped sounding mix. Help. Less extreme upper mid and low end boosts. Thank you. Love your work and use your IR pack on all of my stuff. Well, Jesse, thank you so much. I'm happy to hear that. And for anyone who wants to download the IR pack and use it within your own mixes, there's a link below to my free IR pack in this video's description. So Jesse, what you're describing here is actually the same thing, believe it or not, as cutting your mid-range. If you're boosting top end and low end, or you're boosting, the higher mids and your low end, that's in a sense the same thing as cutting a lot of lower mids, depending on how much you're boosting on your tracks. Because remember, if you're boosting certain frequencies, that's leaving other frequencies behind, and vice versa. If you cut frequencies, you're revealing frequencies that you're not cutting. And we also have to remember this, that it all comes down to the source tracks. If you have guitar tracks that are lacking in the mid-range, it doesn't matter what you do. If they're severely lacking, you could boost all the mid-range that you want. You're not going to boost frequencies that don't exist in the tone in the first place. So what I recommend is this. This is my approach to mixing in general. Do not do things arbitrarily. In other words, don't take a source sound and boost the top end and low end just because you think you should. What I like to do is I like to create a rough mix using only high pass filters. So what I do is I go in there and high pass all of my main instruments, and then I create a rough balance of my mix. And more often than not, this rough balance is 50 to 70% of my final mix. A lot of times we're so hyper-focused on details within the mix and we lose sight of the big picture, because we have to remember, it really comes down to how your mix sounds as a whole. It doesn't matter what each individual element sound like on their own. Remember, we're mixing, we're combining elements. So if you feel that your mixes are often sounding scooped and you're doing what you're mentioning in your email regularly, it sounds like you're just boosting too much low end and top end, and that's revealing too much low end and top end, which in a sense is the same as cutting lower mids. Important to understand this. Again, I highly recommend downloading my heavy mix formula. It's absolutely free. I talk about this in the heavy mix formula, and I think that'll help set you in the right direction. Dude, thank you so much for your question, and keep me posted on your future productions. Okay, question number 2 here comes from Mr. Craig. Hey Bobby, just a quick question which has dogged me for ages. Should I be doing gain compensation in the EQ after the cuts, or activating the auto gain feature on the EQ? When I'm doing subtractive EQ on, say, a snare, I cut at 80 Hertz, dip around 500 by a dB or 2. Should I be level matching after the cuts? By the way, just watched your video on EQing Easy Drummer and it's awesome. Thanks. Well, Craig, this is an awesome question, and I'm gonna share with you my approach. I don't worry about it. If I get my rough mix going with my high pass filters, after that, you're rarely gonna see any massive change in volume or the actual reading as far as decibels are concerned within your meters. Unless, this is what I do experience, is if you apply compression with auto makeup gain, sometimes you will have hotter signals. But again, I don't really get caught up in numbers. Once I have my kind of static mix set with my rough mix, I just apply whatever needs to be applied, whether it's EQ cuts or boosts or compression, and then I don't think about it. Now, yes, if something is visibly clipping and I see red lights happening in my DAW, then I might bring something back. But other than that, man, I really don't get too caught up in numbers. I highly recommend just using your ears and moving along with your mix. And don't worry if after you apply a cut, your meters might look different. Don't worry about that. Worry about how it sounds. Craig, thank you so much for your excellent question, and let me know how that works out for you. Okay, our next question here comes from Warpig. I just have a simple question, but I think you might find it redundant. Can I use a DI box instead of an audio interface? The answer may be no, because you still need to convert the XLR signal into something the computer can interpret. The last time I checked, that's kind of what audio interfaces do. I like how small the DI box is versus an audio interface. I used to have a Scarlett, but I sold it because I used to think that the only way to manage a good sound was recording the amp with a microphone. And now I'm back and I have questions. From what I could gather on YouTube videos, a DI box goes a long way and it's durable. It even outlasts audio interfaces. Can I use a DI box, say a Countryman 85, instead of a Scarlett Focusrite audio interface? Nothing against Scarletts. I like how little space DI boxes take. Thanks. Okay, well, Warpig, you kind of answered your own question here, but I think it's important for me to clarify this. An audio interface, or let me just say this, a DI box is not a replacement at all for an audio interface. All a DI box really does is takes an unbalanced signal and converts it to a balanced signal, or you can also split signals. So for example, let's say you plug your guitar into a DI box, you could steal the clean DI while sending the same signal to an amp, so you could record both the amp and a clean DI. So a DI box is definitely useful if you're using live amps, but if you're using plugins or plan on reamping later, all you need is an audio interface. And I wanna say this, man, a lot of people, they kind of look down on the Scarlett interfaces. I've recorded so many albums with Scarlett interfaces, and I think they're great. I've never had a problem with them, whether it's the 2-channel Scarlett interface for recording vocals and guitars, or the 8 input for recording drums. I've used both and I've never had an issue. I think they're really solid. They have clean sounding pre's, and they did the job for me and no one complained. But with that being said, you have to understand that a DI box does not convert an analog signal into a digital signal. And what an interface actually is generally two different things combined. It's a microphone preamp, and it's also an analog to digital converter, as well as a digital to analog converter. So again, I recommend buying both if you're using live amps. If you're not using live amps and you're just recording directly into your interface sort of is a DI box. You just can't split your signal if you're using a live amp. And I always, let me repeat this, I always recommend recording a clean DI if you're recording rock or metal music. As a matter of fact, I won't even accept projects that don't contain clean DIs when people ask me to mix their stuff. That's how serious it is. Excellent question. And again, they are two different things, but it's important to understand. So thanks for submitting this question, and hopefully this brings value to anyone who's watching. Take a sip of some Spindrift. Okay, our next question here comes from Sean, and it is an excellent one. Any advice for saving a stereo overhead track that's completely dominated by the snare and hi-hats? I'm editing a track at the moment that only has a single stereo overhead track, but the snare and hi-hat are so loud that the cymbals are inaudible in the mix. Thanks for the amazing content. It's really motivating me to stop wasting time with jobs I hate and push to make a living recording and mixing. Sean, I'm so happy to hear this. And what you're mentioning here is by far one of the most common issues that I face when recording amateur recorded tracks. And it's something that I used to struggle with when recording earlier on in my career. I used to believe, unfortunately, due to all of the baloney that's out on the internet, that I needed more expensive microphones, I needed high quality converters, I needed transformer or two-bass mic pre's. I believed all these myths because I would always have this issue. I'd record drummers, and sometimes I would get lucky and the cymbals would sound clear, but most of the time the hi-hats would destroy my mix and it'd be so loud, and the drummer would say, hey, turn up my China. When I turn up the overheads, all of a sudden the hi-hat's killing my mix, the snare's killing my mix, and things just sounded like crap. Do you know what the problem was? I just wasn't recording my cymbals properly. I was trying to record my cymbals how I learned cymbal recording or drum recording in college, which is a more traditional method of recording overheads, and that really doesn't work for extreme genres of metal. And actually, it's hit or miss when it comes to any form of rock or metal production. And this is why these days I always spot mic my cymbals. The concept is simple. If you record your cymbals closer, you have more individual control over your individual cymbals, so your hi-hat and snare and other things that you don't want in your overheads or your cymbal tracks are further and lower below in the noise floor, so you're getting more cymbals through your overheads, which is what you want anyway, instead of hi-hat, because believe me, hi-hats being loud enough are never an issue. As a matter of fact, when I do live recording, I never mic hi-hats, and never once have I said, man, I wish I mic'd that hi-hat. It's always loud. Even if you spot mic your cymbals, you're still getting a ton of hi-hat in your cymbal mics. So with that being said, what do you do if you're mixing something where this is already an issue? I have one solution. Now, I've tried sidechaining a compressor to duck the cymbals when someone's playing the hats. It works sometimes, but usually what works best is simply going in there and spending a ton of time automating the overheads so they're lower when the person is bashing on the hat, when the drummer's bashing on the hat, and I bring up the cymbals when I need to hear my crashes. It takes a lot of time, but if the drums were recorded improperly in the first place, this is what you have to do. And as a matter of fact, we just mixed a song in the Frightbox mix script. That was an old mix of mine from 2009 where this was an issue. And I shared with the group my approach on combating this issue, and it's exactly what I just described here. You have to use a ton of automation to just bury that hat and snare and whatever else you don't want to parent in your drum mix, and bringing up your cymbals with automation when the drummer's riding a crash or hitting a crash in between the main beats. So Sean, excellent question, and let me know if this helps you out in your future mixes. So I would just like to shout out and thank everyone for submitting this excellent group of questions. And if you've sent me a question and I haven't gotten to it yet, just be patient. I will definitely get to it within one of these videos in this series. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of the weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. And again, if you're looking to improve the sound of your mixes and productions, remember that so much of it comes down to just understanding basic EQ and compression. And this is why you could have direct access for absolutely free to my crisp and clear heavy mix formula. You get a free mixing cheat sheet, private mixing tutorials for each of the main instruments within a heavy mix, along with a multi-track download of the exact same files that I'm mixing in the video lessons so you can mix along with me. You can have direct access to the mix formula for absolutely free. There's a link below in this video's description. And until next time, happy mixing.